It is after sunset. A lot of people raise glasses with liquor in them. In my case, I have to raise this glass. So without much ado, I would like to proceed with the program. It's me great pleasure, immense pleasure, to introduce a very prominent and well-loved member of the Parsi community in Bangalore. He is a pharmaceutical scientist and a healthcare entrepreneur. A pharmacist by training, he has received a PhD in pharmaceutical sciences from the University of South Carolina. He started the international clinical research industry in India and was the chairman and CEO of Quintiles India from 1997 to 2011. He became an independent entrepreneur 4 years ago and co-founded two companies. One, Medwell Ventures, which provides home health care and popularly goes by the name of Nightingales. I'm sure you've heard of this. Great nursing care. Next is a hospital called Site Care, India's only organ-based cancer hospitals, and is super specialized in various surgeries, radiation techniques, chemotherapies. This flagship project is a 150-bed hospital launched 6 months ago in Bangalore and is going great guns. It has provided succor to the ailing, the needy, to those in pain. And if some of you have time, I would like you to visit this place, and I guarantee you, you will not be disappointed, because it can rank with the best in the world, because that's what they are benchmarked. Ladies and gentlemen, therefore, with this immense pleasure, I want you to join your hands in welcoming Dr. Ferzaan, engineer. No, these are mine. Can I leave it here?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Hello, everyone. A very warm welcome to Bangalore, especially to those of you who have traveled from different cities in the country and from other countries to be here. All thanks to this platform that WZCC has created. And I guess special thanks to the local committee, which has worked extremely hard to make this event happen. So it's great to be here. And I would like to take this opportunity to tell you a story. It's a story about an entrepreneurial project that my colleagues and I started about three and a half years ago, called Site Care Hospitals. And it aims to create a next generation platform for cancer care in India, where patients can receive treatment and care which is at par with what one would get anywhere else in the world. We are very passionate about this, and given WZCC's bias for social entrepreneurship, I thought the story might be of common interest this evening. On the screen, on the left-hand side, the image which you see is actually a book we have published on our first anniversary. Our first hospital in Bangalore has been operational for a year now. We've seen about 3,000 patients, and 15 of them their stories are in this book, and they've allowed us to tell their stories. So that's what the visual is. World, you see increasing incidence of cancer, and you see increasing prevalence of cancer in pretty much every country. And even more so than the more commonly quoted risk factors such as lifestyle, environment, genetic predisposition, etc., I think demographics probably plays the biggest role. So if you look at uh, the world's population, a little over 100 years ago, there were roughly 1.5 billion people. Now there are 7.5 billion. At the end of the century, there will be maybe 11.5 or 12 billion people. So in other words, in about 200 years, we have managed to multiply about eightfold, and therefore the Earth sees a higher human population at an unprecedented scale. And people are living longer, which of course is a good thing, but it has its own challenges. So if you look at life expectancies, in India we're 70 something. If you look at the small European countries, if you look at Singapore, Japan, life expectancies are now between 85 and 90. I think Japan is 85, Singapore is similar, Monaco is I think 90 almost, and tending towards 100. So of all the risk factors in cancer, I think age trumps everything. If people live long enough, their lifetime risk of getting cancer increases much more so than any other risk factor. On a more positive note, there are huge advances in cancer research, and I've personally seen this in our hospital. So we get patients, just the other day we were dealing with a couple of cases with lung cancer who wouldn't have expected to live beyond 6 or 8 months. And now there are these new drugs, and these people were fortunate to have tumors which profiled exactly right for these new drugs, and they're doing very well. They might in fact end up leading a normal life. So there are huge breakthroughs in science that are happening, and we're kind of at a tipping point where a lot of these things are now starting to work in the clinic. They're of course difficult and very expensive and so on, but those things get sorted out over time. So if you look forward, you can imagine a world where there are lots of people and there are lots of people with cancer. And because of these advances, in the Western world, I think we're able to save about 50% of people who get cancer. They're able to survive. And survival is typically defined as 5 years, and those people who live 5 years typically live 10 as well, and they tend to survive. So by that definition, you would have a world where a lot of people have either been cured of cancer or they are having cancer. And you then start thinking about cancer almost as a chronic disease. So just as if one has diabetes or a heart disease and you pop a pill and you live with that, and in many cases live very well, the same will happen to a number of cancers. They will become like a chronic disease, and you pop a pill and live with it. This is not an unmixed blessing, because it will create a huge societal burden in terms of how do you treat people, how do you care for them, how do you insure them, and how do you have the money for the research that will be required to keep producing new drugs as people get resistant or whatever to the old drugs. So it's an enormous challenge. India has its own set of challenges. They're typically related to awareness, affordability, and access. It's really these three things. So awareness is low, particularly in rural India. We have the mechanisms in terms of payers, insurance companies, corporate schemes, which promote early screening. Affordability is another big issue. We are underinsured as a country. People who are insured are also underinsured for conditions such as cancer. And access is a big issue. access to medical centers, access to oncologists, and so on. As you can see on the next slide, this compares cancer facilities in India versus the U.S. Normalized for population and incidence and things like that. So we roughly have 10 times lesser PET CT scanners, very few LINAC installations which are required for radiation oncology, limited access to cancer hospitals, plus the fact that a lot of our hospitals and oncologists are clustered in 4 or 5 metro areas. And I think the biggest problem is the patient to doctor ratio. It should be one oncologist for 100 people, and we have one for 1,600 people. So it's a huge problem. And this obviously leads to poor clinical outcomes. So compared to some of the Western countries, where we can save about 50% of cancer patients, here we can save about 20%. And we see this in our hospital all the time. We see two things. One is the patients who come very late. So in India, I think we detect stage 1 and 2 cancers only in about 20% of patients. So people who come have very advanced cancers, and therefore we have to palliate rather than cure in many cases, which is unfortunate, because if they had been detected earlier, they would have had a better outcome. The second thing we see is we see patients who have been quote-unquote ill-treated at other hospitals. So patients end up in general hospitals, the surgeon does a surgery and he spoils everything. And then by the time they come to a specialist hospital like ours, things are kind of spoiled. So these are the two big things that we see, even in a sort of modern city like Bangalore. The other problem we have is people generally don't trust hospitals, and in many cases rightly so. So there's a trust deficit, and generally governance is poor, data quality is poor, there are a lot of issues. So we looked at all this, and we thought we'll take this up as a challenge rather than just talk about it, and find the gaps which exist in cancer care, and then create an institution which fills these gaps as best as possible. So I'll walk you through the journey a little bit. The first thing we did as a team, once we decided to do cancer, so to speak, is to introspect, to look outside at the market and also to look inwards in terms of what should be our guiding. It has a psychological dimension. It has, you need to do a number of things outside of clinical practice. You need counseling, you need different types of support systems, you need information, you need continuum of care in the home setting. There's a whole bunch of stuff that's required. So we thought we would set up an institution which could deliver all of that. The third thing we said is we would rather do something which has a societal impact. And here I think the potential for societal impact is huge. And the fourth thing is, and the fourth big challenge is to do this in a way that is financially viable. So we said we'll do a world-class hospital, we'll run it ethically, and we'll still make it financially viable. That's really the challenge. And some bullets on our business model. We initially struggled with whether we should build something which is excellent or build something which is done inexpensively and therefore more affordable. And we decided to set up a center of excellence. We thought we'll do whatever we do to the highest standard, and then that becomes a model. And once you know how to do it right, then worry about how do I replicate it, how do I improve patient access, and so on. But do it right in the first instance. So we built a first-class hospital. We didn't spare any expense. Great building, best equipment, best doctors, all of that. Because we believe that that will create a model and it will create the necessary learning that we need to then expand uh, and reach more patients. It's a hub and spoke model, so in each city, we want to do this in 4 cities. There would be a big infrastructure heavy hospital and then spokes in different parts of the city, maybe the state as well, uh, maybe even in other countries, where our doctors can do some consultations, they can do some work, and for the major stuff like surgeries and radiation, people come to the main hub, so to speak. We decided not to own land and building, and most hospital chains now have gone into a REIT kind of model, so that we can focus our resources on building more hospitals and doing what we do best rather than investing resources in brick and mortar. Our services are priced at market because they have to be. Nothing has come free. There are no donors. There's nothing taken from the government. But even though we price at market, I think we are very cost efficient. And the reason for that is, I'll come to it in a little bit, is that we are able to optimize treatment for each patient. So there are no wrong tests done, there are no unnecessary things done. And I think that makes the treatment much more cost efficient. I'm also finding the last few months we are now approved by pretty much all the insurance companies that in a city like Bangalore, about 40% of our patients are now insured. Maybe it's Bangalore's corporate culture or whatever it is, but a lot of our patients are insured and in most cases adequately insured. So I think that's a very good thing. In spite of that, we find a lot of people showing up who we think we can cure, but they don't have the resources. And that led us to start a charity. We started it very recently, about 3 months ago. We thought we might as well start it because in Indian law, you need to be 3 years old to take CSR money and to take foreign money. So we set up what in India is called a Section 8 company. It's called the Humanist Center for Medicine. And right now it's modestly funded with our own money. I haven't really spent time on fundraising. But that would be used to very scientifically figure out how best to use the charitable money. There are some well-known models how one can do that. And that's how we hope to address people who we think we can cure but who otherwise can't afford to come to our hospital. I'll talk to you about 5 things which I think differentiates the hospital and hopefully makes it a model. The first is patient centricity. When we started the project about 3.5 years ago, we spent the first 1.5 years just studying the subject. We went to Tata Memorial, we went to all the big centers in the world, Harvard, Memorial Sloan, etc. And first of all studied the standard of care. We also went to a very interesting boutique hospital somewhere in upstate New York, and they actually have a program for patient centricity. It's called Plantree, and we are members of that. And it makes a lot of effort in trying to understand what a patient goes through, what a caregiver goes through, what a family goes through. And we have brought a lot of that learning to bear into our hospital. And we have tried to make it a happy place. So birthdays happen, parties happen, even in the radiation room there's a symphony playing, there are beautiful images. We try and have as much fun as possible. And we have a navigator program. A lot of patients who are now cured become buddies of patients who are under treatment. We do yoga classes, we do a lot of stuff. The second thing we found out is that a cancer hospital needs to be organ-based. It has to be super specialized. So really someone who is a head and neck surgeon can't really do a GI surgery. It just doesn't work like that. And in India, I think outside of Tata Memorial, there isn't another organ-based hospital. So for each major organ, head and neck, breast, GI, hemato-oncology, gynae, whatever. For all the major cancers, we have a dedicated team of surgeons. And those surgeons won't operate on anything else. This is an extremely expensive way to do a hospital. But we believe once we reach critical size, it all kind of evens out. And it does make it very difficult in the first 1 or 2 years because you're paying for all these doctors and they may not have enough cases because we don't allow them to cross from one organ to the other. All our doctors, there are about 300 people in the hospital, there are 45 doctors, and we haven't started any specialty unless we get the best specialist. And they're all full-time with us, they're all employees of the hospital. All the technologies are the best available. It's necessary. I'm not super proud of that because that anyone can do. I think it's more the soft infrastructure that really differentiates the hospital. But having said that, you do need all the equipment, and we have it. I spoke about this earlier. We started different specialties only when we could get the best doctors possible. Our head of hemato-oncology was the head of Tata Memorial. He's probably the best hemato-oncologist in the country. Similarly, top-class breast surgeon, there's a top-class GI surgeon. We have relocated doctors from the UK, from Tata Memorial in Mumbai, from St. John's in Bangalore, from Dubai. We have a top-class pain and palliation practice. There's someone from Singapore who runs that, and he doesn't do anything except pain and palliation. I think this is probably the most important part, which is the clinical governance in a hospital. What you see on your screen is our tumor board room, where about 15 people meet, and every single case is discussed in a very democratic way. So you've got the surgeons, you've got the rad-oncs, you've got the med-oncs, you've got the counselors, you've got the pathologists, you've got pretty much all the stakeholders in one room. And each and every case is discussed, all the data is uploaded to the cloud, we can run analytics later on. We are also starting tissue banking, so we don't lose any tissue that comes out in the OTs. And we are able to store that tissue essentially in perpetuity if patients give consent. That would be valuable not only for that patient, but for research. So I think clinical governance here is an important thing. We run it in the same way as Tata Memorial does. It's in fact run by an ex-Tata Memorial person called Dr. Ferzaan. We have started working on education and research. Many of our specialists are also well-known professors. So we have started fellowships and things like that. Every year for each organ we want to do a conference which will help set standards of care for that particular type of cancer for Indian patients. We did a very successful one for head and neck cancer. We had the Dean of Tata Memorial, we had people from AIMS, we had people from all over the world. It went quite well, and next year we'll pick up another organ and do the same thing. We also want to start research in the hospital. I think it's crucial because for a lot of patients and for a lot of cancers we have a solution, but for others we don't, and therefore research becomes very important, and early access to research becomes extremely important. So that'll certainly be an area of focus. These are some of our patients. Like I said, we have about 3,000 people have gone through the hospital. The lady on the left is a well-loved principal, Mrs. Benjamin. On the right is an African lady about 37 years old. The kid on the lower left is actually only 18 years old, and he's doing very well. He came in when he was 16 or 17. And on the lower right is actually a relative of one of our staff members. He was India's kickboxing representative. Next year got cancer. he's kind of cured. It's a blood cancer. He's done well, and now he's back in training. So there are many happy stories like that. These are only 4 of them on your screen. This is our first anniversary. We celebrated it a few days back, actually. We finished 1 year of running the hospital. And here are a few things I want to look at going forward. We want to create a continuum of care. So from hospital to home, all the services, from screening to palliation, everything under one roof in one database is something that we would like to do. We would like to improve our community outreach. We've already started doing it in other parts of Karnataka, so that our specialists can go and upgrade the quality of regional centers. We want to do more education. We want to create a wider knowledge network. I'm very interested in data analytics and artificial intelligence. I think that's one way to scale in India, especially because we need to reach out to other parts of India. We are short on manpower. So I think things like augmented reality, virtual reality, artificial intelligence can play a very big role. And the absorption of technology in the hospital industry is very low. It in some ways shifts power from doctors, and there is a certain resistance. And I think that needs to be overcome. So there's a huge role for technology in hospitals of the future. And even in just looking at data, having well annotated data that you can then use to solve problems. We want to start building more hospitals if we can. Maybe we'll start the second one next year in 2018 if things go well. I want to grow our charity. Maybe in later years even do that full time, and use that charity for research, for education, and for funding resource gaps when we find the right patients. So that's sort of how I see the future, and happy to take questions if you have any. Otherwise, feel free to reach out later.
Of curing the cancer.
It's too early to statistically do outcomes. We've just done 1 year. So whatever I'll tell you now is anecdotal. It's not scientific because I need a much larger data set. But we are collecting all the data, and we will, I guess in another year or two, be able to start publishing outcomes. So the outcomes I can tell you now are kind of anecdotal. You need a much stronger data set to do that.
Therapy. Is there any alternate that you all are thinking of, like cell and DNA type of? Because I don't think this chemo and radiation therapy is the real solution to this curing of cancer. Maybe at first stage or whatever you call it, different stages.
Thank you, sir. See, there are 3 pillars in cancer treatment, right? So you've got surgery, you've got radiation oncology, and you've got what we loosely call chemo. So even if we are doing DNA-based therapy, or what in recent times is called CAR T therapy, where you actually take T cells from the blood and you tailor them for a specific person, for a specific tumor at a specific point in time. So you're delivering something which is very precise, very tailored, and I believe that's one of the topics for the next speaker. I would broadly put all this under chemo, for want of a better word. It's a very loose term. So if you're not operating or radiating, but you're injecting or infusing or popping a pill, I would broadly call it chemotherapy. although it implies chemicals, it's a broader word than that. And I would actually say a lot of cures that we are seeing now are coming from the sort of things you're talking about. It's coming from a deeper genetic understanding. It's coming from precision medicine. It is coming from basically not using a shotgun approach, but tailoring something very precisely for a person, for a tumor at any given point in time. I think that's resulting in a lot of success. The other thing that's happening in precision medicine, which is again a term you can define in many different ways, but one thing that's happening is if you have a better understanding of pathways which basically feed the cancer, you can then block some of those pathways, not necessarily with anti-cancer drugs, but with other types of drugs. So there's a drug for diabetes, for example, which will block one pathway. And typically you would block 3 or 4 because the cancer will escape from another one. So I think all this, it's a deeper understanding of a person and the cancer and the genetic stuff involved. The other thing you find, it's very hard to make sort of general statements. Take for example breast cancer. Now in India we see a lot of what is called triple negative breast cancer. So on a cancer cell, if you've got certain markers, if you will, you can target drugs to that. Now in triple negative cancer, the person won't respond to anti-estrogen kind of therapy, they won't respond to Herceptin because they don't have the HER2 receptors, etc. But you could have another patient who would have all that, and then you have a magic bullet and it works very well. I'm not sure I'm answering your question precisely, but a lot of it is in the chemo domain, but it's becoming more precise.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. One more question, please.
My money, unfortunately. But it took, if you wanted in rupees, about 200 crores, about $31 million. About half of that, about 100 crores, funds the capex inside the hospital because we don't own the land and building, it's leased for 30 years. That saves some money. And the other 100 crores is loss funding for 2.5 years because the hospital loses a lot of money. For example, right now we lose about 3 crores a month till the hospital breaks even. But that's normal in the hospital industry. I guess we were very fortunate because it's a long story, but I worked in a big company earlier which went public, and some of the people who were running that company with me became very wealthy because the company had a big listing on the NASDAQ, on the New York Exchange, and they made that money available to fund this hospital. So it's all private money. We have 2 billionaire investors. One of them is Indian, the other is in the US. And this was good because actually it was very easy to raise the money. I raised the first 20 million in a week. Everyone committed 5 and it was done. So it was very, very fortunate. Now it's a little different because I want to build 3 more. And you can't do this perpetually. So now we are in diligence with one of the big private equity firms in the world, one of the top 4 or 5, who want to fund the whole platform. So yeah, funding is a subject in itself. With this kind of project, you can't do funding in the usual way. You can't do an angel round and then a Series A or whatever. You need all the money in the first year. So, I mean, there is money if you have a credible project. But here it was more luck, I would say.
I think your actual question was, how rich are you, Ferzaan? Anyway, ladies and gentlemen, that was very inspiring, very positive kind of talk. There's a great hope for people who we presume today have an incurable disease. We now know they can get into remission. We now know that they can lead a healthy life thanks to people like Ferzaan and his team who are doing human service. So let's join our hands on this one. I would now request Mrs. Nilofer Dawar, the First Lady of WZCC, to kindly felicitate Ferzaan Engineer. Mrs. Dawar.